Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. It's being hosted by Flo. My name's Josh, and I'll be moderating today's session. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment rather, to thank everyone for joining us and communicate how truly excited we are to be hosting this discussion on the impacts of COVID-19 on EV charging infrastructure. I'd also like to extend a special thanks to our panelists for being here and for giving us their time to delve into this exciting topic. I'd like to remind everyone that today's session is being recorded for future use and will be available on our website in the coming weeks. Similarly, we'd like to note that our attendees today are muted so that our speakers are not interrupted. However, questions may be asked at any time by using the Q&A function, and we'll do our best to answer some of these questions in the Q&A following the panel section of the webinar. I think everyone can agree that COVID-19 has had and continues to have a profound effect on the economy. It's also caused a significant disruption to our way of life, and this extends to the EV charging industry. With me today are three highly esteemed guests, and we'll be spending the next half an hour speaking with them about the impact of the COVID-19 crisis and what it means for EV infrastructure. My first guest today is Norma Isahakian. Norma is the Executive Director of the City of Los Angeles Bureau of Street Lighting. Norma, can you tell us a bit more about your role and the role of the LABSL in deploying EV infrastructure in Los Angeles?
Hello, yeah, my name is Norma Isahakian, and I am the Executive Director for the Bureau of Street Lighting. Let me tell you a little bit about our program that we have in the City of LA. Just to give you a little bit of a background, we actually attach electrical vehicle charging stations to our streetlights. Now I am the Executive Director for the Bureau of Street Lighting, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about our system, and you can go to the next slide. Just to give you a background. So the City of LA has over 223,000 streetlights with over 400 different styles. And that system covers over 4,500 miles of streets that are illuminated, which is only 2/3 of the city. We've had an LED conversion program, which has changed all the lights to LED over the last 10 years, and we're about 95% converted. And the reason I bring that up is because it's very important to explain why our program is so successful, is because that particular conversion program allowed us to have more electrical capacity on our system. Which allowed additional attachments, including EV charging stations that could be attached to our streetlights. Also in the City of LA, our power utility is affiliated with the city, which also helps immensely when you're trying to make negotiations and agreements with your power utility as far as how these EV charging stations will be utilized. Next slide, please. So in the City of LA, we had a sustainability plan that really the goal was to increase the electrical and zero emission vehicles in the city. Next bullet point. EV chargers, basically, in order to do that, we started in 2014 with this program with installing one EV charger. And really the intent was to get them curbside. But, we wanted to make sure that we didn't increase the sidewalk clutter. You can go to the next bullet. And basically, like I mentioned before, the energy reduction on our system provided the opportunity to attach EV stations. So we started, the final bullet, we started doing testing and evaluations of various EV charging stations back in 2014. It's kind of been a journey throughout the process, including the recent COVID-19 pandemic. We've gone through a lot of iterations of attaching EV chargers, branding, parking regulations, cord management. There's been a lot of interesting challenges that we have gone through. Next slide, please. But overall, we've kind of come to the point now where we have 402 EV level 2 chargers attached to our streetlights. We basically attach 150 every year at this point. Each particular level 2 charger has a meter grade accuracy, so we are not putting meters in, and this was one of the agreements we made with our utility, which worked out really well. The typical charge is $2 to $3 per hour for use at this point. There is some discussion of going to cents per kilowatt hour, but since we started in 2014, there really was nothing that was out there in the industry. So we just started with something that was simple for everybody to understand. And finally, COVID-19 has, as Joshua mentioned, has really overturned everybody's world, including the EV chargers. And, our basically common sense was in the beginning, as people were going to drive less, the usage was going to go down. What we did, and because of the economic turmoil of the COVID-19, we decided to make them free as of March 2020 in order to help with all the changes that were happening in the city. And that kind of gives you a background of where my program is with our electrical vehicle chargers. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Norma, for that introduction. Our next guest is Michael Samulon. Michael is the Senior Policy Analyst for Sustainability at the Office of Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti. Michael, can you tell us a bit about what you do with the City of Los Angeles?
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you for having us, and so glad to be here with everyone, and always happy to be with Norma. So my name is Michael Samulon. I sit here in Mayor Garcetti's Sustainability Office, and I have the pleasure of managing our transportation electrification efforts. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So I'm going to provide just sort of a big picture, 30,000 foot overview, which Norma's information sort of gave you the specifics that really apply to this webinar. But on this slide here, which is it comes out of our most recent carbon accounting from a couple of years ago and is in our 2019 Green New Deal. Take a look at that yellow band. That's basically transportation, and a critical piece of what we're trying to solve for here. One of our hugest emissions creators in the city. Of course, it's the biggest GHG emissions in the state of California, and it's also locally of course, the biggest source of air quality problems. So sort of that's why there's sort of not a ton of surprise around here. So we're going to go ahead to the next slide. This is from just a page out of our actual plan, and you can see what our targets are here. We have some pretty aggressive goals for electrification, which the mayor is, personally very excited about. He was an early EV adopter himself. I understand he had one of those EV EV1s. So, it's something he really believes in, and we've set, what look like impossible, but we see as aspirational but achievable goals on electrification. So I'm not going to go over everything, but you can see what they are there. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So very critical, and one of the main ways that I think the city likes to do business is leading by example. It's not fair for us to just say, you go out and do this, you private sector, you developer, you electric charging company or whatever, go and do this. We're going to always try to lead by example, demonstrate, prove that something can be done, and that we're not just asking others to do it. So where you'll see that, for example, first and foremost would be in our public transportation. Our municipal bus fleet here, the LADOT, runs about 350 buses. That's in theory going to be increased actually to around 500 buses. They're going to be fully electric by the Olympics in 2028. And then LA Metro, our regional and the largest bus agency in the area with about 2,300 buses, is planning on being fully electric by 2030. They're going to have a fully electrified BRT line by the end of this year, the orange line, which runs through the valley. So that's very exciting. Our municipal fleet is another one. We've probably got, I think now, around 900 electric vehicles throughout all of our fleets. Lots of, pains of learning, but that's part of the process here, and something that we see as our role for government. And of course, as I'm sure most of the folks on the webinar know, once you get someone in an electric vehicle, they don't really want to go back. So, we usually have some hemming and hawing at the beginning, and then we're like, look, please just take one and test it out. And now we are where we are. And then finally, the infrastructure piece, which is where the Bureau of Street Lighting comes in, but that's not the only area where we're trying to install chargers. So our LADOT does have a bunch of public parking lots around the city. They have some chargers already installed, mostly level 2, but they're actually in the midst right now of deploying DC fast chargers at about, I think, 12 of those sites around the city. So that's really exciting. I think they're going to be between 2 and 4 DC fast chargers at all those locations. We're looking to do that more broadly at other locations, which is what some of our other some of our other public parking lots will do. And then the crown jewel, the Bureau of Street Lighting, and the 400 plus EV chargers on the curbside, which I think still must be tops in the US. I won't say North America, because I think you guys over there in Montreal have more than us, but we'll take what we can get, and I'm very happy to be leaders in this field, and there really are a lot of operational benefits and for going with the curbside chargers. Okay, let's move along. I think I have a couple of pictures coming up. There it is. There's an electric bus. It says it right on the front. Let's go to the next one, please. Just municipal fleet, you know, looking at what we have. And it's not just cars. You can see we've got some electric bicycles there, which are great. And we look at other unique modes of transport. It doesn't always have to be a four-wheeled car. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So just some of the other curbside stuff going on, of course, Bureau of Street Lighting, which we're going to hear more about. But our utility has tried doing some of this as well. They've got about 45 or so power pole chargers, which have turned out to be not as easy to do as the streetlight chargers. And I think they're rethinking their approach to that. And then we've got our Blue LA program, our low-income EV car share, which we're very proud of and has had great success. And then we're going to be making the curbside available to private companies to come in. That's an ordinance we're working on. So I think we can just go to the next slide. We'll be hearing more about this, but the unique challenges and opportunities of doing curbside work. The one on the left there is one of Norma's. The one in the middle there is one of the Department of Water and Power. That's the real world. This is what we're dealing with. And I think there's one more slide, please. So again, just our Blue LA program. There is a COVID relation here. We had service stopped for a little bit, and then we have brought it back online in a sort of reduced manner. But we wanted to make sure that our residents, and especially our residents in our disadvantaged communities, would have access to this transportation system. So I will stop there. Very excited to talk about this. Looking forward to the discussion.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Michael. Our next guest is Travis Allen. Travis is the VP of Public Affairs and General Counsel at Flow. Travis, why don't you take a moment and tell us a bit about both Flow and your role with the company?
Yeah, well, thank you very much, and a big thanks to Norma and Michael for joining. This is a great thing to get to speak with both of you. So Flow is one of the leading EV charging networks in North America. We were founded in 2009, and since that time, we've supported over 5.3 million charging events, and have produced over 30,000 high-quality charging stations. Those are charging stations for home use, also in the workplace, and also on the go, so public charging, both level 2, such as the curbside stations that are deployed in Los Angeles, and also larger DC fast charging, including 50 in our recently announced 100 kilowatt charging station. So we're very happy to be part of one of the suppliers, the City of Los Angeles Bureau of Street Lighting. We've spent a lot of time developing curbside charging, particularly in the city of Montreal, which is another major deployer of that technology, because it also has a lot of curbside parking. And I'm really interested in this discussion in COVID-19 because in my role, which is the legal team and the public affairs team, I've been closely implicated in how our company has responded to COVID-19. And also, when we talk to governments across North America, COVID-19 is, of course, the biggest thing on anyone's agenda. And so it's been a really interesting time to be in those roles, and I'm really excited to hear what Norma and Michael have to say.
Oh, perfect. Well, now that we have everybody situated, I'm going to jump right into our discussion. And our first point of discussion is for Michael. Michael, a crisis of this magnitude has forced all of us to reconsider our priorities and the ways in which we go about our work. How has COVID-19 affected the decision-making process for your sustainability initiatives? And what steps have you and the City of Los Angeles taken to reorient in light of these impacts?
Okay, big question. And really, at this point on June 17th, we're not talking about just a COVID issue. We're talking about COVID. We're talking about an economic crisis, I think is reasonable. And, social unrest, which, have been affecting many cities around the globe, I think. So the way this is affecting us is in many different ways, as you might imagine. So there are the very immediate economic hits that all municipalities and most businesses have felt. So just like any other government, when the economy shuts down, revenues stop coming in, and cities take in revenues in the form of taxes and other special funds and things like that. So that's obviously put a cramp on our direct spending. So projects that maybe we had in the queue for next year being put on hold. One very big example of that, unrelated to electric vehicles or electric charging, is a big building that we were planning on building here in the Civic Center that's going to be at least put on hold for now. These are the kind of big decisions that have to be made, and this does affect things in a programmatic way as well. So unfortunately, at this point, they're even looking at money that had been allocated in previous years, and that's the level of impact. So I'm hoping that for most of my projects, I will be able to maintain funding. I'm very happy to say that as our budget team, sitting here with very few people in the building in the midst of the pandemic, got out a budget that did include money for Norma's program. And the reason behind that is, one, it's one of the most public-facing places where the city can help people. It's also one of our fastest ways to quickly and at scale deploy chargers. Without going into too much detail, we don't have to permit, and Norma's teams already know that the capacity is on those lines. Obviously, there's some engineering, but it's unlike a normal installation that can take months and months of engineering, design, and things like that, and construction even. So our budget team made the decision, and that's literally no other EV program was funded for the upcoming fiscal year, which starts in July. So that shows the importance of the curbside program. So we're excited about that. Obviously, as relates to COVID, we're in a new normal. There's no vaccine. People are changing the ways in which they get around. We don't know, will vehicular mobility go up ultimately because people don't want to get on public transportation? We're sort of anecdotally hearing that. We're also hearing about a run on bicycles because so many people are, grabbing their two-wheelers like I did this morning to come into work. It's a new normal, and I don't think any of us really know what exactly it's going to look like. So it's hard to predict. I think right now we're taking things, one day at a time, 1 month at a time. Let's see how this recovery goes. Let's see how people behave. Are we all going to have real short memories, as is typical human nature, or are we going to sort of take this to heart and all hang out in our caves at home and not go out? So I think we're waiting to see what happens.
Okay. I think that's a really great segue. Norma, hearing Michael talk about the importance of the curbside project in Los Angeles, obviously we can now surmise that the Bureau of Street Lighting plays a critical role in the deployment and management of the EV charging ecosystem in LA. Can you speak a little bit about the decisions made by the Department of Street Lighting in response to COVID-19 and what effects those decisions have had on the charging behavior of the EV driving community in Los Angeles?
Yeah, so as Michael mentioned, this coming fiscal year, which starts in July, we have currently been funded our program for the next fiscal year, which I thank Michael for because he's one of our biggest advocates. So we're very excited to basically have the program still up and running. So as I mentioned, we have 432 EV chargers attached to our streetlights. And basically COVID-19 basically turned everybody's world upside down, as I mentioned earlier. Of course, everybody saw how all the streets, and us in LA, it's very interesting to have seen streets that were empty, because I don't think we've ever seen that for the longest time. But we had roads and freeways that basically cars were not driving anymore. So from our standpoint, we figured that, basically the EV usage on our electrical vehicle charging stations were going to go down. But I think one of the slides just went off. But basically, and also, so as of March, because of the economic turmoil, we decided that we would go ahead and make EV charging for free. We talked to our utility. There's certain things you can get as far as carbon credits, and we basically made an arrangement so that we could reduce the price and make it for free. So basically that happened. So this slide shows you when that happened. This is basically the free charging station that started on March 20th. And as you can see, all the revenues basically went down. But interestingly enough, we did see a change in behavior. So the charging was still happening. You can go to the next slide. And we can talk a little bit about this. Basically making it for free. It was basically looked at as saving people $68 per month as far as charging their vehicle. So if you can go to the next slide, we did see a change in behavior. Basically, we were looking at mostly charging in the evenings, but that shifted to basically midday. And I think one of the things, we don't really know for sure, but one of the things that did happen, and just to get to the punchline, the charging really didn't go down, which was very interesting. I think what happened was that most of the people were doing a lot of charging at their workplace. And basically everybody now is working from home. So what happened for those people was they had to find another way to charge. So my thought is that they started charging at home, finding places near their residence. And that's one of the reasons that even though they weren't driving as much, we've seen a consistent level of charging on our stations. And of course the behavior changed. You can see from the evening to the afternoon. So I think that had a lot to do with basically, basically having that. And we haven't really had any, we have had, like Michael had shown some pictures of a lot of vandalism on our EV charging stations, and that has been happening here and there. And, in the beginning, it was probably a little bit more than it is now. We still have our fair share of graffiti and vandalism on our units. Nothing really increased during this last month during the unrest. We haven't had any reports of any damage to our streetlights or the EV charging stations at this point. So that's kind of reassuring. So yeah, these are the decisions we made in response to COVID. And it's interesting to see how things have changed.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I find the decision to make EV charging free in the pandemic is really interesting. And I just wanted to ask, we've talked about the impact that it's had on station utilization and charging behavior, but I just wanted to follow up with you, Norma, and ask, do these results support what you were trying to do when you made this choice?
Yes, I believe it did. When we made this choice, it was basically to address the economic turmoil that was happening in the city of LA. Just one additional thing we could do to help people get through these events. And as you can see, with the increase in charging, I believe it has. I believe people have taken I think they changed to our stations because they weren't able to charge in the workplace. And then surprisingly, they were like, hey, I'm not getting charged for this. What happened? We even had a couple comments of what's going on in LA. And so I think our decision to do this has really, resulted in what we intended. As you can see here, we've had significant increase in charging. Even if we had a couple new stations that went in during these times. So even when we factor that in, there still is a significant increase in the charging at these stations. Also here, you can see the kilowatt hours that have been charged. Again, it really has gone up. And I think it's because those people are now home looking for a place to charge, even though they're not really driving as much. They still have to charge their vehicles to get to the store and whatnot. So, I think it really has done what it was supposed to do.
Perfect.
I'd like to add just one note to that as well, which is this really is the unique role that government can play. We are not subject to the issues of a publicly traded company or any private business for that matter. We are here to provide a public good, of which transportation is a basic good. So I think when Norma brought this up to me, it didn't come to me to do this. This was Norma's idea, and she went out and figured it out. And I think it's just a fantastic example of how the government is here, for exactly these kinds of events.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, just to pivot a little bit, we've heard from both Norma and Michael here. Travis, as a network operator and supplier of charging infrastructure, what did COVID-19 mean for Flow, and how did you respond? And I suppose further to that, what steps were taken to ensure the continuity of services, and what efforts were made to ensure the safety of both Flow's employees and its customers?
Yeah, that took a lot of time. It became a real full-time job on top of a full-time job. So we, first priority was health and safety of customers and employees. And customers, I include both site hosts and our station users. So what we had to do, number one, as with all other, big organizations, was to figure out what the best science was, what the best guidance was from public health agencies, and then really apply that directly to how people interface with our charging stations day to day, and how our employees who are actually out building stations and servicing stations would work with them. So we developed special safety protocols, special safety kits. And from there, I would say, we really did look at our values as a company. So what do we most care about? What do we most stand for? And those are things like user experience, good communication. So we made sure to keep communicating with our site hosts and our users and say, this is what we're hearing. This is the best way to protect yourself when you're using a public charging station. We recommended using wipes if possible, but also, defaulting to hand sanitizer or hand washing if you need to, because at that point, really everybody was trying to figure out, how do we do day-to-day things that we always did before without thinking about it in a way that is healthy and safety and protects people around us. So there's a lot of communication. And then we also really were focused on sort of the core things that we offer, which is reliable stations that work when you need them. And I remember, just anecdotally, when I started at this company a couple years ago, everybody would talk to me about, this is an integrated platform and it's so important. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. And then during COVID, when we were doing our situational meetings every day, I started to understand why people cared about, so much about the fact that we can look at what stations are doing and figure out how they're operating, and then fix things remotely if possible. Because in the case of COVID, it actually allowed us to avoid sending service teams to particular stations, which helps protect the service teams, of course, but also helps minimize the number of physical interactions with the charging station. And so that was something that I guess really hit home for me as being important. It's a key feature of networked smart charging stations in addition to billing. And so that was something that I guess I hadn't expected that would be something I'd be focusing on during COVID, but it ended up being very important that there was vertical integration. So I would say those were probably the main things that I was focused on during this period.
That's excellent. Yeah. I would like to just circle back to Norma and Michael for a moment. Perhaps you can both weigh in on this. Have you guys received any feedback from your EV driving community regarding the free charging? Have people responded positively to the change, and what factors might influence whether you continue to offer free charging moving forward?
So I'll get started, and I guess Michael could fill in. We have received some feedback from our users, basically kind of wondering what's going on. All of a sudden, my charger is free. We started this thinking that we were going to do this for about a month or two. And then basically based on the analysis that these chargers are still being used, and of course the COVID kind of continued and is still going on, we decided to continue it. So based on their feedback and the data that we kind of looked at, saying, basically seeing how the use, it's very important for these people. And that's what I was saying. I think because they're not at their workplace, they need a place to charge. It became very important for them. So we've decided to basically kind of continue it as long as our utility will work with us. And we're probably going to go through the summer at this point, if not longer.
Yeah, I would just add on to that, sort of in the big picture, you know, the gravy train can't run forever. And our goal, per what I was saying earlier about the role of government, is not to make money on these necessarily, certainly not right now. Our goal and our role is to help incentivize the creation, acceleration, and growth of an EV market, and cleaning up the air and all of that stuff. So for the time being, as Norma indicated, while we're able to continue to provide this type of free service, which the LCFS credits that Norma mentioned are a critical component to that. So there's two pieces to the free chargers. One is the service charge, which vendors like yourselves and our other partners were willing to drop for the network activities, the point of sale costs. And then the LCFS credits that our utility was able to put towards this. And that's actually a pretty important piece of this, because the utility has ratepayers to report back to, essentially. And in the city of Los Angeles, the residents and the ratepayers are one and the same, because the utility covers the whole city. But that being said, from a sort of legal standpoint, they can't just go and spend ratepayer money. So we're really fortunate to have access to these LCFS credits, which allow for the offset of these costs at the moment. Otherwise, we'd be coming out of Norma's budget. And, you know, we all know that no one's got extra money. So I think you'll see at some point we will absolutely have to start charging, in addition to just cost recovery for, you know, electricity maintenance, things like that. In our bigger transportation goals and our efforts to, while we want to electrify, we want to reduce the number of single occupancy vehicles overall. You know, there is value to the curb. And so we need to think about that as well. We need to price it appropriately, as Dr. Don Shoup would say. So I'll just leave it at that.
No, thank you, Michael. Thank you, Norma. I want to ask Travis, what would you say is a key takeaway for Flow from the COVID-19 crisis? What have you guys learned?
So I think I've been reflecting a lot on, you know, the many takeaways from this, but I think the biggest one for charging networks as a whole is that COVID-19 was the thing that prompted numerous influential governments and agencies to recognize that EV charging is an essential service. And that, I think, picks up on some of the things that Norma and Michael were talking about earlier. We saw, you know, agencies that are important across all of North America, like the California Energy Commission and the government of Quebec, who have been, you know, consistently working on electrified transportation, say, hey, EV charging is actually an essential service. If you drive a battery electric vehicle, that's it. And you know, if you're someone who lives in an apartment or a condo and you can't charge at home, then public charging, curbside charging, those things are essential to your ability to get around, get to work, get to the hospital if you have a medical emergency. And so, you know, looking back and thinking, what will I think looking back on this 10 years later, I think that will be an important time, an important thing in the history of our industry. It's also a bit of a challenge to our industry. Going back to some of those photos of vandalized stations, this is ubiquitous, high interface public street furniture. And so cities and agencies are looking at ways that they can deploy and achieve their environmental goals, but also make sure that it's done in a way that is sustainable from a cost perspective and that is safe for users. And so I do think the other impact, or the other thing we'll be looking at, is what are the new requirements for essential services, critical infrastructure like EV charging. And I think that's something that will play out from COVID, and there will be an increased focus on those stations operating as and when needed. So I think that'll be a big takeaway as well.
Oh, thank you very much, Travis. I'd actually like to extend the same question to Norma and Michael as well. We are getting close to the end of our time here, and one of the things that I want to ask you guys is just for the LABSL and the City of Los Angeles, not only something, not just a key takeaway, something that you guys have really learned through this process, but what happens next? I mean, from a policy perspective, from a deployment perspective, Norma, what steps is the City of Los Angeles going to take to ensure the continued adoption of zero emissions vehicles in kind of the post-COVID world?
Well, I'll start and then Michael could fill in. Basically, our key takeaways is that, EV charging is something that is critical for the residents in the city of LA. And curbside charging seems to be very convenient for them. And with this COVID-19 crisis, I think the free charging has really helped. Of course, right pricing is the way we're going to be looking at things. Like Michael said, we're not here to make a profit. Basically, we just kind of cover our costs. Our next steps are basically to continue our program. We're constantly looking for ways to improve the interface with the constituents. We've gone through several different chargers, looking for something that's reliable, something that is user-friendly, and we believe we have found that, and we're very happy with the chargers that we have. So that really is, for the Bureau of Street Lighting, is our next step, to work with Michael, who's doing the bigger work across the whole city as far as the big EV adoption. He can talk a little bit more about that, but we're basically playing our part.
Yeah, so it is a critical part, this one. We need our curbside chargers, so excited to have Bureau of Street Lighting continue to do that. The city does have numerous tools in our toolbox, and we will continue to use them to help ensure that our goals that I showed earlier on the slides come to fruition. Of course, there's a lot of unknown. One of our electric bus projects has been put on hold temporarily while there's basically triaging the metro budget. So these are the realities of the world we're living in. It may mean some delays. We know that overall there's been reduced VMT, not for the reasons we would want, but in the meanwhile we'll take it. I think some of the things you can see the city doing will be code related. So for example, in December, we updated our building code to require a lot more EV chargers in new buildings and major renovation. We're gonna actually be working on a slight modification or sort of a cleanup to that, which is gonna allow for DC fast chargers, which were not included in the original version of it. So that's an important one. Our utility does, while they continue to have LCFS credits and other tools of this nature, will continue to have very robust rebates and incentives for EVs, EV chargers, and the like. In fact, they, I think, have put $60 million towards incentives over the last 18 months. So I don't know if all that's paid out, but I think that's how much is committed. And that includes medium and heavy duty charging, DC fast charging, commercial level 2 charging. We also increased our used EV rebate from $500 to $1,500 and saw a huge increase in uptake on that. So we are fortunate to have tools there. We're also looking at other things. We're working on a zero emission area. That's the kind of tool that sort of creates discussion and then ultimately movement around a specific area in the city. There is a congestion pricing study going on, and if we're able to look at things like they've done in London, where on top of their congestion price that they've had for a decade, they're able to layer on an emissions price. Those are the kind of things we can do. All of that, of course, has to be done very sensitive to everything that's going on. So making sure equity is at the forefront of all of these decisions. We can't do anything that is favoring, let's just say, people who don't need to be economically favored in the same ways. So we need to make sure that these benefits are rolling out to the communities who need the help the most, who it will serve the most. And actually that's one of the, just to bring it back to Norma and the Bureau of Street Lighting, it's one of the most exciting parts about their program. It is agnostic to location, as opposed to private companies who would normally say, well, we're going where the cars are, or something like that. The Bureau of Street Lighting distributes their chargers around the whole city equitably by council district, and that has a de facto effect of getting a significant number of chargers into areas where they may not otherwise go. So just to put a button on it, making sure that whatever we do moving forward is done with a lens of equity at all times.
Oh no, guys, these are really great answers. This is really wonderful insights. I'm going to do my best to work through a couple of questions that we have here from our audience. There's a question for Travis. Travis, what could be lessons learned for cities in Canada from what the city of Los Angeles has been doing during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Sure, yeah. So we do have a North American audience. I was looking at the list. My biggest thing is I hope that everybody listened to how many times Michael talked about LCFS credits or Clean Fuel Standard credits, because we have an opportunity to have those in a number of jurisdictions across North America, not just in California and Oregon. So that is a really important possible financing stream that would be from a federal or provincial government. I think that the other things that we're really learning from the City of Los Angeles's experience and the City of Montreal's experience is it actually goes back to what Michael was saying about equity. So if you only put stations where you have very wealthy people who are driving very expensive vehicles, you will get a backlash. And we've seen that actually in other jurisdictions in North America. And so one of the things to really do is just make sure, as Michael said, you apply an equity lens. It needs to be democratic, because we're not going to get large scale adoption of EVs until we have charging opportunities for everyone, particularly people in multi-unit dwellings. And particularly as we start to get a more advanced used market of electric vehicles, because that's when we'll start to see a lot more people being able to drive electric.
Oh, thank you. We're going to do one more before we wrap up. This can go to Norma or Michael. This is another audience question. Does the City of Los Angeles and the LAPSL, do you own the charging stations themselves? And if so, why do you find that to be important?
So I'll go ahead and answer that one. So for us, yes, we do own the charging stations. We purchase the charging stations. You know, we work with our utility, get rebates on that. But we do own the charging stations. The reason for that was because we were actually connecting it to our street lighting system. So it's important for us because it's on the same circuit as our street lights. So that way it is something that our crews can really work and maintain. And that was really the main reason, was we wanted to own those stations. Doing anything else would have brought in a lot of complexity into the program. And we, like Michael said, this is one of the programs that's easy for us to deploy. We don't have to get permits. We don't have to put things into the sidewalk. So we tried to make it as simple as possible, and basically purchasing them outright was the simplest way for us to do it.
Yeah, I would just add to that. We do, for the most part, own, in all of our other facilities, we own the infrastructure. And aside from the Bureau of Street Lighting, where it actually makes sense for us to be the owners, we're waiting for the day when we don't have to own this stuff. We're very excited for the market to come in and provide all the charging that's needed. That would be one less maintenance and operations hassle that the city doesn't need to deal with. So we're waiting for that. But again, just acknowledging the role we play in helping to get the EV world juiced here and past the valley of death or whatever.
No, thank you very much, Norma and Michael. It looks as though we're coming to the end of our time here today, folks. This discussion has been engaging, it's been insightful, it's been timely, and I can't thank our panelists enough for their efforts today. So Norma, Michael, Travis, thank you very much for your insights. And before I let everybody go, I'd like to remind you all that today's conversation is part of a series of webinars that's being hosted by Flow. And the next in the series is titled, How Fast is Fast Enough? DC Fast Charging for Cities and Utilities. And it's going to be taking place on June 25th at 2 p.m. EST, so 11 a.m. PT, same as today. We hope to see you all there for another conversation about what it might take to lead the way towards a more sustainable future. So thank you all for attending, and I hope everyone has a great afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.